Good afternoon. My name is Loki Karuna. I'm the Director of Artist Equity for the American Composers Orchestra, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's professional development session titled Helping Hands Traversing Artist Management. Among the questions that I get from composers and early career artists the most surrounds this very topic. Questions like, how do you secure management, or what can a manager do for a composer? Well, questions like those and more will be addressed today. Before I move forward, I'll note that the music that we were just enjoying there was written by Trevor New, who was a selected participant in our collaboratory program last season, a work there that he titled Cohere Touch, as performed by the American Composers Orchestra under Maestro Glenn Alexander II. That performance actually involved musicians not only here in New York, but also from around the world through digital technologies. You can check out the full video performance on YouTube. Jordan, our program manager, will drop a link in the chat if you'd like to take a look at that performance following today's webinar. It's a really exciting performance. Well, today's session is a part of our broader Earshot initiative, which is the nation's first systemic program for building relationships between orchestras and composers. Through Earshot readings, our collaboratory program, consortium commissions, professional development, and our recently announced publishing arm, Earshot expands the definition of American orchestral music to ensure a vibrant and inclusive future. Earshot is a program of the American Composers Orchestra completed in partnership with the American Composers Forum, the League of American Orchestras, and New Music USA. For more information on Earshot readings, collaboratory, and all of our programs, visit americancomposers.org. I'm sure you'll have many questions or comments that come to mind over the course of today's presentation. So if you wouldn't mind offering those using the Q&A function here on Zoom as we go along, we'll get to as many of those as we can. And if you'd like to come on screen to ask your question live, you can do that by using the hand raise function here on Zoom, and I'll bring as many of you on screen as I can and as time allows. Just be sure to keep your digital hand raised and I'll get you on screen. I'll also be offering a survey in the chat at the conclusion of today's presentation. So if you wouldn't mind clicking that link when it appears and offering your feedback, it will be much appreciated. And with that, I'd like to introduce to you today's featured speaker, Peggy Monastra. Peggy is an arts manager, consultant, and teacher based in New York City with over 26 years working in the field of contemporary and classical music. She joined the staff of the legendary international music publisher G. Schirmer Incorporated Wise Music Classical in 1993 and serves as an advisor to a number of independent composers. Previous positions include advisory work with Opera Philadelphia on new productions and commissions, music specialist at the Library of Congress, and tenures as a secondary teacher of music history and piano instruction. With a background in piano performance and pedagogy, vocal accompanying, musicology, and gamelan performance, her greatest interest has always been in working with contemporary music in all areas of the performing arts. Peggy, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Loki. It's really nice to be here.
And joining Peggy today is our very own Melissa Ngan. Melissa cultivates personal and organizational growth through creative acts and collaborative practices. She has over 15 years of experience in civic practice-based program design, arts administration, diversity, equity, and inclusion practices, professional development, and entrepreneurship in the arts, and as a professional flutist. Melissa was previously founder and CEO of the Chicago-based Fifth House Ensemble and continues her work as an active speaker and educator. Melissa, always a pleasure.
Hi, I always get so excited when you introduce me. It's like, oh my gosh, like being introduced by Loki Karuna. It's a wonderful moment in my life. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you both so much. Take it away.
Well, Peggy, I'm so excited to have you here. You're one of the most incredible advocates for composers and new music that I know through all of the different hats that you wear. So I'm just thrilled to be having this conversation with you. No worries. And I think you might be on mute
Yeah,
there. There we are.
Sorry. I was going to say I feel likewise about your work. I find it very inspiring, and you likewise are a great advocate. And the advocacy is really at the core of everything I do, no matter what the position or who I'm talking to. I really feel that it's a much needed part of the work of those of us in the background to support the creators and to keep them informed of what their rights are and what they can do in many different areas of the work. and even in the most like legal business side of things, there isn't a composers union, not in the same way that there's a musicians union, or there's, actors, there are things for everybody. So I think the advocacy that people like you and I do is really crucial to the work.
Yeah, that's for sure. And in addition to the nuts and bolts of contracts and fees and all of the back office things, it's always just good to remember this is a very human business. It's all built on relationships. And people like you who have all these existing relationships are such an incredible resource to any composer who wants to come into this space, who wants to advance their work. And in particular, when the type of work they want to advance extends beyond the networks they have. So it's very exciting to be able to have this conversation. And before we get into any of the nuts and bolts, I want to just take a minute so that everybody who is being introduced to you, whether they've seen your name in multiple places and all the various places you've traversed in your career, or might be meeting you for the first time, can kind of get a sense for your pathway through composer advocacy work, the different hats that you've worn along those lines, and how that's looked for you.
Great. Well, I started my serious musical studies as a pianist, and I very early on discovered that I was in school with composers and that they had new pieces they wanted me to write. So it really started there. And then I went into musicology studies after I had been teaching for a while. From the musicology, I ended up at the music division of the Library of Congress, which was really wonderful, fascinating work. And I was fortunate that first I was put to work on the Modern Music Archives, which was a legendary magazine from the earlier half of the 20th century that was all content created by living creators for the most part. People like Virgil Thompson was writing for it regularly, and Bertolt Brecht even wrote for the magazine. From there, I worked on the Aaron Copland collection. He had just recently passed away, and so I had my hands on many of his primary materials, acetate recordings, letters, manuscripts, helping to house that so it would last forever in eternity at the Library of Congress. And I became more and more anxious to kind of get my feet wet, get my fingers dirty, get in it and help make it happen, instead of the kind of musicological side of writing about it, but actually being in it. And I had tried my hand at composition, knew that I was not one with that spark. So I thought, well, I can use all of my passion and education and energy to be in the background and help make it happen. And
Yeah, that's wonderful.
shortly, right upon moving to New York, a position was open in the Schirmer Company, and I started there and have just been here for now over 30 years.
Exactly. And, in addition to your work at Schirmer, I have always heard your name in the context of opera. Like any composer who wants to get their feet wet or wants to advance their career in opera, you're one of the first advocates that I hear about. And so you've done a fair amount of work for Opera America, as we heard as well, too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they had brought me on at a certain point to be an advisor to the composers receiving grants. So I would sit in the adjudication and take copious notes and then provide the feedback calls, both to those who received grants and those who didn't. That is one of the amazing benefits of applying for a grant at Opera America, is that they actually provide feedback on those that are declined. And at first I was very trepidatious about that, but then I soon found that it was very, very welcome and that people very much appreciated that feedback. And I've learned over the years how it's a real rarity to get feedback on a declined grant application. So that started to feel like really wonderful, valuable work. And I met a lot of wonderful people that way. The work in opera came through my work at Schirmer. Ending up working, I inherited a lot from one of my predecessors, a lot of her knowledge and a lot of her connections and experience. And then I took over managing that aspect of our promotion and our commission negotiations. And operas are much more multi-layered than some of the others because of all the rights involved. I also happen to be married to someone who specializes in contemporary opera, so I was around it a lot at home as well as at work. And then I was invited to do some consulting work for Opera Philadelphia, which is a company that I still adore, that does incredibly invaluable work supporting composers with their residencies and with their commissions. So that's some of the underlying aspects of where my opera knowledge comes from, in particular around contemporary work. I'm still working on learning some of the existing repertoire that came before, the 1980s. That's where it gets weaker for me.
Well, that's kind of awesome. That's the case. So it speaks to a life well lived in music. So I want to just pivot now to some of what I think is going to be most of interest to those who are watching this. As
Right.
Loki mentioned, whenever we ask composers who have been through our programs what they most need help with next, some sort of I need help with management, knowing what management is, being introduced to management, understanding how I can best position myself, some form of that tends to come forward. It could be, and also I should say, management and also publishing. Those are sort of two things that start to come to the fore quickly. So we'll kind of talk about the span and spectrum of that. But before we get into those roles and what exactly they do, it might be good for us to think about what the composer's back office looks like,
Mhm.
because these are things that composers will do for themselves prior to the point where they have somebody else do it for them. So you've prepared some really great materials here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen to kind of give us a bit of an overview of what this looks like. Um, and so if you could just chat us through a little bit, some of the things that composers need to have their hands on in addition to the writing of their music in order to get to the next stage.
Right. And the order of these will shift from day to day. So my numbering system isn't necessarily a priority order. And I will also preface everything I'm going to say going forward is that no one size fits all. And we, the managers, and you, the artists, the creators, the composers, need to, I think, regularly reassess what are your needs and what are your strengths, because the more you do, the more you'll learn, the more you might be able to take care of yourself with confidence. I think having the confidence to know you're doing it right is really, really crucial. So with promotion is a lot of things. When I've talked to composers individually about it, or the work that we do through the team here at Schirmer, it has to do with developing new commissions, getting repeat performances of your existing works, and then hopefully getting some recordings, because having existing recordings is really crucial to not only introducing your work to other people, but then possibly for opportunities where it might get used in choreography settings or in media settings through synchronization licenses. And then as far as bookings, that is particular to you and what you do. And not everybody is particularly strong at speaking. And if you are, or if you're really motivated to do educational work or mentoring, then that's something that a promotion manager could help you with. As far as PR, this is something that I think, especially early in your career, you want to really focus it on individual things, such as a major premiere or a season in which you have a whole lot of things happening. That's going, because a PR person, if you're actually engaging with a PR person, that's press and media primarily. This person can also help you develop your website so that all of the content on your website is really helping advance interest in your work and in you as a creator. And then they might also help you with social media. Editorial work, that's something you may already be doing for yourself, or you may have already engaged someone to help you with it. Everybody handles that a little bit differently. And then how do you get your materials to people? That's the fulfillment aspect of it. Are you selling certain works? Are you renting things? Are you printing it? Is it PDFs? How are you shipping it? How are you managing the fees for those things for either sales or rental? Making sure your works are registered with PRO like ASCAP or BMI or CSAC, and having your copyright registrations all in place. And then legal help would be whether you educate yourself on the content of agreements that you're going to have to do, or whether you're going to work with someone else. There is a lot of information online, I can tell you. There are a lot of videos. I even saw one person do a very long tutorial on how to do a commission agreement for a film score and all the things that you look for in there. But take it all with a grain of salt, because everything is individualized, and some people's expertise might not be as expert as it comes off. So how's that for a summary of all the back office?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely excellent. And, one thing that I'll highlight on the booking side, you were really wise to say that this is very individual to every artist. One thing that I will always encourage is for every artist to find what that looks like for them. Because particularly as a composer, you know, let's say that you're a flutist or a chamber ensemble or whatever the case may be, you're going to be on the ground. Like that's going to be the process. But if you're a composer, some folks might see that as being optional or on you, if that makes sense. And I think if there are ways that you can be an asset to any ensemble, orchestra, opera company in terms of additional things that you do in addition to sitting in the hall and watching your music, that's a great way to extend that engagement. And always being able to think about ways that those types of skill sets can help the orchestra or opera company or ensemble do what it is that they most hope to do in relationship with their public. That's a wonderful thing. So just wanted to highlight that too, because that was great advice.
Yeah, and picking up on that, I mean, I think you also have to make sure that your commission agreements manage those expectations, or if someone is doing an existing work and they want to pay to bring you in, make sure that you discuss up front what would be included, so to speak, and what might, require an extra fee.
That's exactly right. And, you know, as we start to move forward into the next slide, which is really about how do you get help with some of these things? You know, exactly what you said. Those are the kinds of details that if you have an agent or a manager working with you on that, they'll start to ask those questions on your behalf. So I kind of want to get into, first of all, recognizing that that's a lot on that first slide that we looked at. It's a lot to do, and it's all necessary. It's as necessary as the art making itself. So talk to us a little bit about the point at which you start to say to yourself, I need somebody to help me with some of these things.
Yeah, like I said at the beginning, I think it's a continual assessment process. If you're not working with a publisher where that's already included in the work. So let's say you're thinking about it and you're noticing that your time to compose is shrinking and shrinking and shrinking, and you're writing with stress and with pressure on deadlines, and because you're having to manage all this other administrative work, that is a point where it's a good time to start thinking about getting some help. And it doesn't mean that everything that was on that first slide is where you need your help. Your help might just be one area of that. And if you can get someone to help you with that, then that opens up a lot of time for your composition and your creative space. You know, you need a lot of headspace as well as time to be able to do your best work. When, the bottom line is when your best work is not possible because of all the other administrative work that's coming at you.
Yeah, that's really great advice. I think a lot of people ask me, what are the most difficult moments you've experienced in your own career? And for me, it's always been the moment right before I let go of something in the way that you've just described. Like I have been doing something for myself, or it's been in my role as part of an organization I'm working with. And it's the moment right before I release that off to somebody else because, it's something that has grown to the point where it's not sustainable. So it's really good to be thinking about that. And also considering in the same way that the process of deciding what a booking looks like for you is very individual. It's both a matter of what's stressing you the most, what's taking the most of your time, and perhaps also the thing that you are the least suited to do on your own for any one of a variety of reasons. So how you decide to prune that is going to be very much up to you.
Exactly.
I
And
wonder if we
different
can get in.
from year
Yeah,
to
go ahead.
year too. It'll be different from day to day, month to month, year to year,
Yeah,
depending on what your project load is.
Yeah, that's super great advice. So I wonder if we can get a little bit into what each of these folks might do in specific. And I think we're the lawyer and legal, we have other webinars that we have gone through and are going through with that side of things. So we're focusing a lot of our attention today on the artist, manager, publisher side. So I kind of want to move over here into agents and managers first. So talk to us a little bit about these two words and what they mean. I know that they can be somewhat nebulous, synonymous, overlapping. So I'm curious if you can share a bit more about what that means on your end.
Yes, I've definitely heard people use it interchangeably. And one of the composers I've worked with for many years always introduces me as their agent. And I think of myself as their manager. And I recently learned that an agent is someone who is typically has a license to do that kind of work, whereas a manager can really be anyone. It's not as regulated. However, you'll note in my third bullet point here that there are some exceptions to the regulations about being a licensed agent that exist in New York and California. But But starting at the top, a manager's job is to provide career guidance and business management. So it's very much a one-to-one relationship. It's strategic advisory work. It's also helping you manage these things that are keeping you from being able to do your best work. It can really be anyone. The most important thing is, do they have the knowledge that they need, or are they able to learn it, and are they willing to learn it to give you the best guidance? And, to really help you with strategic planning. Do you trust them? Do they get you as an artist? Do they get your music? Are they able to talk about it? If they're going to talk on your behalf about anything artistic, can they speak about your music intelligently and appropriately? Like, is the language that they use something that you're comfortable with? You don't want them telling them something that you really feel doesn't represent you properly. And a manager can work on a lot of different levels, and especially, as I was pointing out with the laws in New York in particular have relaxed that quite a bit. With an agent, the focus is typically on booking and then securing the details and the agreements around the bookings. They will also do promotional aspects to introduce you to the field so that people even know that you're there and that they can book you for whatever work that they're looking to bring you in to do. So that's really the basic difference. And like I said, so an agent is going to be somebody who has a certain type of a license. And then a manager can be anyone. It can be a family member. It can be sometimes it's even another composer if they're looking at putting their composition in the back seat, because then you know that they get them. But like I said, really knowing that it's someone that you can trust to represent you both professionally and artistically is really key there. Agents will very often have a much larger roster, and there are some artist agencies right now who are starting to take on more composers as part of what they do. And if you're somebody who works in the media field, such as film and television scoring, those are very often agencies where they will have a roster that's exclusively composers. And they're working hard to get you booked into a contract for something in that field. More so in my work as a manager, both at a publisher and independently, it is much more about the strategic planning, commission agreement negotiations, and advisory work on, like, help, I'm in this tough situation, what do I do? Or I'm having this problem with this administrator, or a problem with this artist, or I really want to do this project, but I simply don't have any time. Those are the types of things that a manager will work with you on.
Yeah, that's super helpful. And it's also worth noting that there are some situations, regardless of how the person tends to introduce themselves, like manager or agent, they'll usually say agent if this is the case, but there are some that do both. Like there might be one person who actually does both of these for you. So it's good to have that conversation up front to really know what door you're walking through. But I think the distinction that you mentioned in terms of an agent will usually have a lot of people they're working with. A manager might have fewer people, and they're really sort of the engine that makes things go, as opposed to the one who's out there pounding the pavement to get you work. Like that's actually a really good distinction.
Yes, exactly. And I know, down at the bottom of the screen, which on my screen, it's a little bit cut off, but I think it's also important. The thing that I wrote in all caps at the bottom is discuss the fees before any work is done. I mean, first you want to have a conversation. You can ask any manager or agent for an informational conversation, anywhere from like 15 minutes to 30 minutes. I've seen that this even advertised that this first conversation is complimentary. You're not expected to pay anything for it, as long as it's just getting acquainted and familiarizing each other with how the manager or agent does their work, and then also what kind of work you're looking for, so that you can have kind of a meeting of the minds and see if you should take the next step forward. If you start talking about an agreement, make sure you understand very clearly what work you are looking for them to do and whether they will agree to do that kind of work. And then what the fees are. And it might be different fees for different aspects of their work. And I know that agents their fees tend to range on the higher percentage point of what your fee will be. And managers, it's it's different with each one. So that's why I say it's really, really crucial to discuss it up front. Anything between 10% to 20% is within the norm.
Yeah, that's super great to know. So I want to keep going for now. And for anyone who's watching, we will provide these slides as PDFs. And sorry if things are getting a little bit cut in the display here. We'll make sure that we get that done. But I want to talk a little bit now about publishers, because there can be some overlap in some of the things that they do, but there are some big differences here. So let's kind of get into that as a next step. And I know that you've had work independently as a manager. You've worked with artists as a sole proprietor, as a single person managing their career and doing that kind of strategy work. There's also a world in which a publisher does some of that in addition. So I wonder if you can share a bit about your experiences on that side.
Right. And again, each publisher is a little bit different. The larger companies tend to have a promotion staff. Sometimes it's one person, sometimes it's more. At Schirmer right now, we have 3 full-time composer managers, promotion managers, and then we have some support staff for them. And my work as a vice president is an overlap between like traffic cop and a little bit of composer management still. So the promotion is often a part of it, but if you're considering working with a publisher, make sure that you talk to them again about that upfront and find out what is available, because some are much more focused on the rest of the administrative work. And it also depends on what type of agreement, because there are various types of agreements out there that exist with publishers. Some have a much wider range of what they look to do. Some are exclusively 100% copyright assignment publishing deals. Some are a mix of publishing, co-publishing, and administrative deals. And I know that this is a lot of terminology flying by very quickly. As you know, Melissa said, these slides will be available, and there's also a lot of information explaining some of these things online. But I just want to kind of keep going through the types of things. The promotion composer managers will help develop and negotiate commissions on your behalf in many cases, unless if you have an agreement that says that the composer will do that. A lot of composers really prefer to have hands-on, deep in the weeds, negotiating their commissions, and others want nothing to do with it until there's an agreement. And the way we would do that then is we go back and forth with the composer about every single detail that we're committing them to, including this, you know, what the forces and durations are, what the fees are, what's being covered, what's not being covered. And then again, like I said in the beginning, if you're appearing personally in rehearsals, education events, fundraising events, to have all of that outlined in the commission agreement if you can. It's assumed that a publisher is taking care of your score and parts, but to what degree? You know, are you just sending over completed files? Are they doing editorial work on those? Are you giving them a pencil manuscript or a Sibelius pencil manuscript and they're engraving it and then doing all the editorial and proofreading work? Beyond all of that, though, there's also the storage and the upkeep. If it's physical materials, it's really upkeep in the old-fashioned sense, you know, making sure that the paper's protected, that if something gets too damaged, that a new set gets printed, keeping it in storage, making sure that old editions are thrown away or put on a shelf saying do not use, and keeping up with the revisions that you might make to a work. Distribution, that's, you know, really boiling down to, are you, you know, the rental and sales of your works. And sometimes that's a commercial print run, or it might be a print on demand. And then rental, you know, you deciding which works are going to be rented, meaning you don't want to sell those so that they can be performed at any point. We typically draw the line at Schirmer. We draw the line at something that needs a conductor usually, or like 6 players and under will sell, and anything above will rent. But again, that's a case by case. Royalty management, collection of your royalties, both from grand rights or licensing that does not involve the PRO, like beyond your ASCAP or BMI royalties, but including those, and then distributing them out to you and any of your collaborators who are due payment. The copyright registration, which is crucial. I'm assuming that you all do that on your own already, but if you're working with a full-scale publisher, they can do that work for you. They can also make sure to protect it and manage it in all the various ways that it needs management. And some of that is the next bullet point, which is licensing. If there are performances that fall outside the scope of ASCAP or BMI, such as a dramatic work, which they do not do performance licensing for as part of their blanket agreements, then a publisher can negotiate that for you, such as, like I said, the grand rights of opera, ballet, and dance. Managing recording agreements that are more complicated than like Harry Fox would do, and then synchronization agreements as well.
Exactly. So it's extremely comprehensive along those lines.
Right.
So just a couple of clarification questions, since that's a lot to digest for
Yes.
folks who might be new to this type of work. You had mentioned a couple of different options at the beginning: full publishing versus administration. I wonder if you can share a little bit about what those mean and how the financial deal around them might be different in general.
Right. So with a full traditional publishing agreement, that is that your works, whether it's on one work or a few works or your entire catalog, is the copyright, the publishing copyright is assigned to the publisher. And so you are co-owners of the work, with the publisher owning the publishing of the work, the copyright. And they, in exchange for owning it, they are doing all of these things. And again, each publisher is slightly different, so you need to make sure you discuss it as to what's included in that. That's the very traditional model. There are some other models where there might be a co-publishing agreement, which means that you share the publishing ownership, typically 50-50 in a deal like that. Sometimes there are different percentages of shared ownership. And then an administrative agreement, which is typically less attractive to a publisher because it can be just as much work on your behalf with a smaller percentage of income, because what you're doing is you're retaining the ownership of the copyright, and you're doing an agreement with the publisher so that they will do all of this administrative work on your behalf for a percentage of the income, which they will collect all of your income and then hold back whatever that percentage is that you've agreed. Is that clear enough?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And in the case of an admin deal, they might be taking some of your music, but not all, and I wonder if, let's put it this way: if you're looking at these things side by side and you're a composer, you might say to yourself, oh, I definitely want an admin deal because that's more flexible and, less financial commitment. But I'd love for you to unpack, as someone who's out there promoting the work, getting it done, what is the advantage of having that sort of long-term commitment, and also the span of a full composer catalog versus piecemeal as you're having those conversations?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough thing to talk about, but one of the really basic elements of that is that it's a life of copyright investment on the publisher's part, and they're taking a gamble that in taking this work on and doing all of this work on your behalf, that it's a commercial entity. It's a for-profit business in a nonprofit field when we're talking about kind of art concert music. So very often it's a risk and an investment in the new signings, and it's the back of the catalog that someone signed to the publisher 50 or 40 years ago that is now generating lots of steady income. At Boozy and Hawks, they have Aaron Copland's work. So, that work is so well known and it's performed somewhere in the world every day. At G. Schirmer, someone like that would be Samuel Barber's music. And so the risk is more in the front end of the catalog as opposed to the back end. And eventually the front end of the catalog becomes the back end of the catalog. So it's this kind of cycle of investing in the future and then having it pay off. Now, the hope is that every composer who is involved with the company is going to ebb and flow in terms of their income, but that there will be some kind of steady income, which allows for the salaries and all of the costs of running the company. Does that explain it well enough?
Yeah, it does. And I would also say, just having, I'm not a formal publisher myself, but we do have a number of works that we have an admin deal with through our Earshot. And I will say that one of the things that I'm learning is that the more works you have from a composer's catalog, the more likely you are to be able to find a fit with whoever you're speaking to.
Absolutely.
Because if you just have one work, let's say, and it doesn't happen to be the right instrumentation, length, subject matter, vibe for whatever program, you might not be able to offer anything. Versus if you've got that full composer's catalog, there are more options to get that composer through the door, right? So that's one of the things that I think about too, in terms of just the span of work that one person is doing for you.
Yes, exactly. And that kind of ties into all the promotional work that the promotion managers might be doing. Um, and I should point out that, we might talk about this a little bit later, but when a publisher is looking at a catalog, I mean, first they're assessing the art, but then they're looking at, what are the types of works? And does this composer actually need the publisher? Can the publisher do something for them? And can the composer's work do something for the publisher, in terms of this kind of relationship that goes back and forth? And yes, the breadth of a catalog certainly provides a lot more opportunity for programming. And in my work early on, I discovered that unknown composers, like if I was representing someone from Europe, because we have a lot of affiliate offices in Europe, and if their work hadn't been done here yet, it was much quicker to get a smaller chamber piece into a performance, and then we would see it kind of grow from there up. That the live performances would happen with smaller pieces. There are a lot more opportunities for programming smaller works than there are larger works, and then it would kind of grow from there.
Yeah, that makes great sense. And as a person who's worked on both side of things, just a clarification question. When you're working on the publishing side, you'd mentioned that let's say you have a newly commissioned work, you might be also involved in negotiating some on-the-ground services in conjunction with the premiere of that work. Let's say that a work is being done for the second, third, or 70th time. Are you also involved in that kind of booking, or is it more just getting the parts out the door as a rental?
Typically, we do end up helping with those conversations, because typically the programming entity, whether it's an orchestra or a chamber music series, they don't always have the funds put aside to pay for travel and housing, and maybe even an appearance fee for a composer if it's the 70th time it's being done. They might have that, but in most cases they won't. They will sometimes say, well, you cover your flights, we'll get your hotel covered, but there's no appearance fee. So it's a little bit different with each case. But yes, sometimes we do get involved in that on the composer's behalf. And again, this is one of those things where sometimes the composer would much rather have that conversation themselves. Usually not that one, but we will step in and do those as well. But that's why I was saying there really is no obligation, and there are some obligations that you can put into a rental agreement, like when we're negotiating with somebody, certain things like complimentary tickets and things like that. But you really can't obligate an orchestra to bring you if they're not one of the commissioners, and they don't have any obligations to you beyond what is in the rental agreement.
Right. So once again, you can't obligate them, but you can make it more attractive if there are offerings that you can provide on the ground, which is where kind of that booking side starts to show up. So I want to just stop our share here for a second, just to kind of get us a little bit more into the relationship behind how some of these things can work. First of all, it's the case that most of the time, a publisher and agent won't necessarily be as interested in pulling you in if you haven't proven to some degree that you can do those things for yourself. So like it's sort of a continuum of being able to establish yourself through doing those actions for yourself to a certain degree and then moving forward. So I guess one of my first questions to you, and one that's very frequently asked, is how can a composer position themselves to be attractive to a agent or to a publisher? And what types of things would you be looking for?
Well, the types of things that, like, as a publisher speaking, what we're looking for is, like I started to say a little bit ago, we look at the artistic creation first, and is it something that we believe in, that we feel like if we take it on, we can actually achieve an uptick in performances, an uptick in commissions, and just really be there to help grow that person's career and that person's number of performances. Beyond that, sometimes we look at how much they've done this administrative work for themselves, but that tends to be different with each person, and it's not the make or break. I was talking with an agent, a composer agent. Well, this is somebody who does both performing artists and composers, the other day. And she said to me, for me, one of the, after we assess the art and what we think we can do for each other, I want to know that that person's going to be an equal partner with me, that they don't just dump all the work in my lap and walk away, that they're going to work just as hard as I am to achieve the most success with their work. And I thought, that's absolutely true. And the composer should always stay invested in their work and always be willing to talk to administrators and performers and not leave it all on the manager, whether it's a publishing manager or an independent manager. Now, you can ask your manager to have the really difficult, uncomfortable conversations on your behalf, but most of our administrative colleagues really value the opportunity to speak one-on-one with the creator. And so you want to be able to stay involved in that way. You want to be able to stay involved that way beyond just one administrator, but perhaps their board or perhaps their audience. So that's an important part of it. You want to know that it's somebody who really takes deadlines seriously, and doesn't overload their schedule with things that will get in the way. That really comes into the strategic planning side of things. But if, when you're having these initial conversations to feel each other out, that might be one of the things that a person might ask you is, how are you with deadlines? Because that can really make or break the success of a premiere. And, those are really some of the key things, the art first, and then, how do you manage yourself professionally? Right. And if you're not somebody who's comfortable with being out in front of your music, then that needs to be established up front, so that there isn't an expectation for something more involved than what you're really comfortable doing.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I want to just underline in red what you said earlier about being an equal partner, because I think a lot of people believe that when they get an agent or a publisher, they can just take their hands off the wheel, sit back, and all of the gigs will just flow onto them like stars. And it's just worth noting that, to be a great partner to someone who is out there promoting on your behalf is exactly what you said, being willing to be in those conversations, but also being super active in the process. And every agent, manager, publisher relationship is going to look a little different in terms of the rhythm of that. But I will say for me, when I first signed on with an agent, one of the first things that we did, we had a very active list of prospects. We were already booking a lot for ourselves at that time, was to share that list of contacts, where we were in all of those conversations, what we were anticipating getting from those, for two reasons. First, because we wanted to make sure that we were being really effective together in picking up those conversations at the right stage, knowing that they were probably active, but also because some of those folks would probably still reach out to us directly, and we'd be, bringing the agent into those conversations. But we also wanted to make sure that there was never a situation where the agent was reaching out to that person assuming it was cold and not being aware of an existing relationship. You know what I mean? So again, contacts are one of the most sensitive pieces of collateral in a conversation like this one. And an agent or a publisher is not likely to share their entire list with you, because that would not be appropriate, in the same way that it's not appropriate for a PR person to share their whole list with you. But going the other way is absolutely going to be to your advantage. I'm curious if you have anything to add to that, or any clarifying thoughts, because that can be one that people get confused about.
Yeah, well, and to your point, I think it's important to know when to stay out of it and not interfere. So that, along with staying engaged, maybe knowing when to step back and making it clear that you get that, and that might not be appropriate. A lot of these things can be kind of felt out in that informational interview I just mentioned. And I would say, as an aside, just so that I know that we get it in this conversation, that managers can be hired for strategic planning alone. You can pick somebody that you've heard about, that you think really would get you. And if you have that informational interview and it looks good, one of the things you can potentially ask for, no, I can't say across the board everyone will do this, but most will say, yeah, you can book a few hours of strategic planning with me, or just advisory work. Maybe you're completely comfortable doing your own promotion and your own commission agreements, but you really just need someone to help you think through the next best moves, or the right people to approach. I don't know who would like my music. Can you give me some ideas based on your connections and knowledge? So that's also an option. You don't have to make a long-term commitment. You don't even have to necessarily promise a percentage of a commission fee. You can just pay for, a range of hours or one conversation, but make sure you're prepared before you do that.
Absolutely. Make the best of that time. And so I'm going to go ahead and answer. That was exactly the response to a question that is here in the Q&A, about what to do if you're not quite at the stage where you would be ready for an agent.
Mm-hmm.
Getting that in the form of consulting with
Mm-hmm.
someone who's out there as a booking agent or publisher can be another really great way. We have another question here about if there's a general music income level or milestone where a composer should be engaging in these services. I know we've talked about that more from the perspective of if you have so much activity that you don't have the time to do the art well. Is there anything else that you would add to that, or is that really just the answer?
Well, in that case, I would say, really choose how you're spending your money wisely. If you're in a tighter situation, then it can be money very, very well spent to pay for an hour, 2 or 3 hours of consulting. And you can stretch that out. If you pay for multiple hours, you can stretch that out over a period of time when you really need some help. But again, doing your planning and your questions up front is really you're going to get a lot more out of it, and send them in advance. Send the concerns or send the requests, or say, would you please look at this document, or would you look at my website and give me feedback, but provide it all up front so that the actual talking time is much more efficiently used.
That's excellent advice. And as a person who frequently gets requests for that kind of time, I
Mm-hmm.
always appreciate that because I can get a lot done in 15 to 30 minutes if I've done good prep on the front end. So that's really, really
Exactly.
great.
Yeah.
Um, and then one other thing that I am curious about is there ever value in having a booking agent and a publisher at the same time? And if so, how would they work synergistically?
Yeah. Or even just a manager, right? And sometimes that manager is maybe a project manager, or maybe just a manager on a retainer or a long-term relationship. I have had a lot of experience at Shermer working with both agents and outside managers. And what's really, really key is that there's regular communication, and that you establish upfront who's doing what. I always say, we have to make sure, to be fair to the composer, that we're not double dipping, that the agent or the manager isn't charging them for something that the publisher could and should be doing. So really sort out who's doing what. Very often when it's an administrative relationship with a composer and a publisher, it's an outside manager or agent who's taking care of a lot of the work.
Yeah, that's super helpful. And another question that's coming through from two people, slightly worded differently, is how you meet publishers, agents, and managers, how they should be approached. Like, is a cold email even worth sending? So I'll pause there.
Yeah. Well, get to know who the people are, and you can always reach out cold. And again, the best way to start would be to say, could I have 15 minutes of your time? Um, and most of the people who are in these types of position are in it because we're really passionate about the work and about the field. And we're always interested in who's coming up and who's new, or who's, decided to really focus their life on composition at this point. Um, Sorry, I'm not sure if I remember the rest of the question.
Basically, how do you find
Oh, right. How do you find them?
publishers, agents, managers, and what's the best way to approach them?
Yeah, I mean, and I have in the past, just over time, because there aren't a lot of managers who are specifically focused on composers who are out there working freelance. So I will often, every once in a while, just Google. And, a lot of the time what I find are people who are more like Hollywood managers and agents, that advertise that they work with composers. But in terms of, the types of composers who I imagine are on this call, or who are affiliated with American Composers Orchestra or other organizations, other performing live music organizations, there aren't a lot. And so word of mouth, talk to the composers that whether they're maybe a former professor, or maybe just your colleagues that work with a manager. Just ask people for names, because sometimes a manager might be really kind of quiet and low level. I know everything that I was doing when I was part-time freelance was coming through word of mouth. I had not gotten to the point of making a website or advertising that side of my business, partly because I was still working at Shermer, but I also had a very full plate. But it came through word of mouth. And sometimes I just talked to one person one time for an advisory call, and then they told someone else that I could do that for them. So asking people that you know and trust, looking on the internet, If you go to any conferences, you know, like an Opera America conference, an Orchestra League conference, a Chamber Music America conference, the publishers are probably going to be there on some level and at some form. So you can always introduce yourself that way. The managers and the agents, more primarily agents, not so much managers, will also probably be exhibiting at some of these events. But
Yeah,
yeah.
that's great advice. And one other thing that I'll add into the mix here is that one thing that doesn't tend to get said as often as it should is that a great practice for any artist who's looking to advance themselves past where they are is to be tracking other artists who are doing things that you would most hope to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that you can do along those lines is if you have, you know, somewhere between 5, 10, 15 artists whose careers you've been watching for a while to see what they're up to, who's commissioning them, where their music is getting played. You could also be
Exactly.
looking at the contact page of their websites and seeing who they have on their team.
Right,
And you might
exactly.
start seeing some things in common. You might start seeing agents whose rosters have a lot of composers that you really like.
Mm-hmm.
But again, Peggy, I'm going to underline what you said. There are fewer agents out there working with composers specifically. So word of mouth is also a huge piece of that. So we're actually preempting an answer to a question that's in the Q&A with that. And I agree, the question of, do you have 15 minutes that I could spend with you on a couple of strategic questions is a really great way to kind of start that conversation.
Right, right. And you kind of referenced this in what you just said, but I often, when I'm speaking with composers, is more even along the promotional side of things, is who are the artists out there that are, in your opinion, getting the work that you want to get and successful, and what's the affinity between your work and their work? Like if someone's really, really interested in composer A, is your music really similar, or, you know, does it fill a certain appetite, or is it really, really different? And if it's really different, then maybe look somewhere else, because you know, people who do programming and make decisions about what is performed have very specific tastes of their own, and or they might be answering to a music director that has very specific tastes. And you can always feel it out. You can say, look, I know this is not what you're used to doing, but, you know, let's try anyway, or ask your manager to do that on your behalf. But that kind of affinity trail is something I like to advise as well.
Yeah, that's super great. And it sounds like we also have a question on the sort of promotion side. So if you're seeking your first full orchestral commission, how can you prove it to an orchestra? How can you prove that you can do it? So it sounds like this is a question from someone who has a fair amount of experience in chamber music, but is looking to get in front of orchestras for the first time. So should you have a mock-up of something? What would you advise?
Yeah, I mean, it's at a typical, it's a challenging place in everyone's careers when you start graduating from kind of being outside of being a student into a more professional life. And I would never advise a creative artist to do something on spec, but there probably is a point in your career where you really just want something to show. If you haven't had the opportunity as a student to have a piece done by a student orchestra, and you just don't have anything to share, you don't have a score, you don't have a recording or anything on any streaming platform, then invest in it. You know, if you have something that is created but never performed, you know, get a really, really good MIDI recording of it. Most people, you know, throw their hands on their ears for MIDI, but it's so much more improved now. Or maybe you're going to invest a little money to hire someone to do that for you, because there are some people who do really amazing work with these very high-end MIDI samples. Or if it's something that is smaller, but you don't have a recording of it, maybe you're going to hire some people to do a recording of it. But you need to invest either time or money at some point you may need to invest time or money to build up what your portfolio is that you can share with people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really, really helpful. And
if you're not lucky enough to have friends to do it for you as a favor. Trading favors is, you know, a really important thing. The kind of whole bartering system can really come into play early in your career. As I said, I really don't like to suggest to anyone that they do something for nothing, but there may be a point. And if you can think of it as, this is my art, I need to make it. And yes, this is my profession, and I need to find the way that those things can feed each other. That there will be some, even if you're extremely successful, there may be somebody who asks you down the road to do something for a very low fee. And if you're passionate about it, there's nothing wrong with doing that. If it really means a lot to you, or if, I hate it when I see these calls for scores that, ask you to pay a registration fee, do all these things, and send them a complete score for a work that has never been performed. You know, it provides an opportunity, but it also asks a lot. So you have to decide if you're at the right point to say yes to that.
Right. That makes perfect sense. And I'll also say that everything you just articulated is why Earshot exists. So if you're looking to make relationships with orchestras, definitely checking out Earshot as a entry point. It is a gateway to the field, and a lot of opportunities come out of that first point of entry. We're just at time now, so I want to just ask one last question here, which I think is actually kind of lovely. What is something that you find that composers most often forget to ask you in these meetings? So it might be the unexpected piece of wisdom that you always hope to share.
What do they forget to ask me? Well, like I said, sometimes it's that money question. How much are you going to charge me? Which is really kind of brass tacks, but on a higher level, um, what do you think of my music? I often don't hear that. And, I'll be honest, sometimes I will talk with somebody because I want to support them, and they might not even really know their music yet, but, or, you know, that's a tough one. I don't think it's consistent that there's any one thing that people regularly forget to ask.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, actually, I think that there was a nugget of wisdom in what you just said, which is a great way to sort of close this. There's so many different kinds of publishers, agents, managers. They come in all different shapes and sizes, all different kinds of levels of experience, types of contacts, past history, track record of work. The best one is the one who can talk about your work with a level of passion and conviction that matches yours. Because in any situation that they will be in, if they really get you, and if they're so excited about you that they can't stop talking about you, things are going to happen. That's my feeling.
Yeah.
And that is the type of relationship that's really hard to find. But you'll know it when you have it.
Yeah. And if someone who's been doing this work feels that way, then other people are going to feel that way most likely, and they're going to help communicate that to the other people.
Well, Peggy, Melissa, that was a extremely, extremely enlightening conversation. So thank you both for taking the time, and thank you to everyone for attending today's session. I do welcome your feedback on today's webinar, so please use the link that I just put in the chat to offer your feedback. That helps us determine what will be the best topics for upcoming webinars. So I appreciate you in advance for taking the time to fill out that very short survey. We do have a few more of these webinars scheduled for the remainder of our 23-24 season. So be sure to keep an eye on on our website for those upcoming sessions, and be sure to sign up for our mailing list if you haven't already subscribed for not only upcoming webinars, but also upcoming opportunities, including earshot readings, calls for scores. Another huge thanks to our earshot partners, the American Composers Forum, New Music USA, and the League of American Orchestras. We're extremely grateful to the many individuals and organizations who have made Earshot possible through their support, and to ACO's artists, staff, and board for making this program a reality. Again, for more information on Earshot and all of our Earshot programs, visit americancomposers.org. Special thanks to the Altman Foundation, Elizabeth and Justice Schlichting, the Mellon Foundation, the Sphinx Venture Fund, TD Charitable, the Fromm Foundation, the Ford Good Neighbor Committee, the Aaron Copland Fund for Music, the Alice M. Ditson Fund of Columbia University, the League of American Orchestras with support of the Virginia B. Toolman Foundation, the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs in partnership with the City Council, the New York State Council on the Arts with support from the governor, and support from the National Endowment for the Arts. Thanks again for taking the time to join us today, and we'll see you next time.